Hello back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie entitled Luther the Fallen Son. Let's get straight into the storyline. The film begins with a man named Callum, who is contacted by someone. During the call, Callum is threatened by the caller. If Callum does not want to meet him in 15 minutes, Callum's personal video will be disseminated. Callum, who was working overtime, was forced to comply with the mysterious person's request. While on the way, Callum stopped his car because he found someone lying in the middle of the road. Then, Callum reported the incident to the police.
Yeah, I can check.
However, not long after that, suddenly, the unconscious person got up again and instantly immobilized Callum. The next day, a police chief detective named John Luther came to the scene. Apparently, apart from Callum, there was a bank employee named Clara who had been found dead in her car at that location. But strangely, Callum was not found at that location.
That's the question. He left work.
Wrong place at the wrong time, is it? Someone wanted him here.
Therefore, Luther approached Callum's mother, Corinne, who also came to the scene. Corinne, who was worried about her son's safety, then asked Luther to find Callum immediately.
I need you to promise me you'll find Callum.
I promise.
On the other hand, a man named David was seen talking about Luther. Apparently, David told his friend that he had to prevent Luther from searching for Callum, who was apparently kidnapped by David himself. Before ending his call, David asked his colleague to collect all the background information from Luther.
I want his shame.
And sure enough, it didn't take long for Luther's depravity to be exposed to the media, with citizens now flocking to see Luther on trial. Luther is alleged to have frequently conspired with criminal gangs, including breaking into homes and intimidating suspects. At the same time, David was thrilled that his plan had worked.
I think we are about ready.
Luther's entry into the prison was certainly a favorite among the prisoners, as they could now take revenge on Luther for putting them in jail in the first place. While Luther was taking a shower, he was suddenly attacked by the prisoners. Meanwhile, Corinne seems surprised to be contacted by Callum, who asked Corinne to pick him up. In a hurry, Corinne immediately went to the location given by Callum, which was a white luxury house, which was Callum's last location. Corinne, who called and heard the ringing sound of her son's mobile phone, immediately traced the sound of the phone.
Callum, it's me, it's Mum!
A moment later, several people appear who come to the same location and follow Corinne. Outside the house, David is seen wearing a mask, contentedly watching the people inside the house suffer. The next day, we see a detective who replaced Luther, named Rain. Her superiors contact her and tell her to go to the scene of last night's incident. Luther, who was in prison, witnessed the news of Callum's death along with several other people who were burnt to a crisp inside a luxurious house. Police investigations showed that the house belonged to a resident who had not returned to the UK for 5 years. The victims were mostly people who had disappeared several years ago. That's where Rain asked her members to find the main perpetrator of the serial killer.
And you'll have our killer.
Yes, Mum.
Let's get to it.
On the other hand, Luther also thinks about who the cruel perpetrator is and who has the heart to act like that. Then, someone sent him a letter. The letter contained just a piece of paper with the number 65.8, which turned out to be a radio signal that Luther had to play. During the radio broadcast, Luther heard a man screaming in pain. Luther, who heard the words of the perpetrator, who was none other than David, looked shocked because he had the heart to torture before killing his victim. It was then that Luther realized that his existence in prison had been planned by the perpetrator. Before the broadcast was over, Luther was approached by a warden who said that someone wanted to meet him. That someone was none other than Corinne, who was very disappointed that Luther could not fulfill his promise.
You looked me in the eye and promised me.
Huh?
I hope you never sleep again.
Wait. Corinne.
Liar.
After meeting with Luther, Corinne gets back into the car, which, unexpectedly, is driven by David.
Much for doing this. I never could have driven myself.
A few minutes later, Luther contacted Rain with the mobile phone he had hidden. On that occasion, Luther explained that the mastermind of Callum's kidnapping had sent him a message. Luther also added that it was likely that the case would continue, as the suspect had also sent messages to the victims' families. Luther believed that the perpetrator had an audience in carrying out his actions.
Tell you why? Because something's coming. And whatever it is, he needs an audience.
Before Luther finished speaking, Rain asked Luther not to interfere in the matter.
You can't help me, John. Do not call this office again.
Then Luther contacted his colleague for help. Unfortunately, before Luther could finish speaking, the police came to Luther's room. The next day, Luther asked his colleague to let the prisoners, or even make the prisoners attack him. This was done so that the prison would transfer Luther to another prison, and Luther would have the opportunity to escape.
I mean, in theory, yeah, but I can live with that.
In the afternoon, in the CCTV monitoring room, a prison supervisor was seen finding a prisoner who was about to hang himself. Then, the supervisor tried to stop him. But who would have thought the act turned out to be a trap so that the prisoner could free the other prisoners, which then caused chaos in the prison. In his cell, Luther was attacked by prisoners who had previously been ordered by the warders. For his actions that were in accordance with the plan, Luther was transferred to another prison. And when on the way, suddenly, the car carrying Luther was attacked by a group of people who immediately freed him.
Come here, man! Keep your hands still! God!
Apparently, they are all Luther's colleagues who want to help him. In a different place, David is seen visiting his wife, who is being treated at the hospital. That's where David showed a recording of an interview with a man who lost his daughter. Seeing the recording, David's wife seemed disappointed that David continued to perform the action.
I want the world to know. Gotta let it.
Sometime later, Luther is taken to his group's hideout. That's where Luther is given a car that he can use to find the perpetrator.
If you look after it, which you haven't.
Cheers, then.
At the same time, Rain received information about Luther's escape.
Luther's out.
If it's what?
Out.
6 hours later, Rain went to her former boss, Martin Crawley. The purpose of her visit is to ask Martin to help her find Luther because Martin is one of Luther's closest friends. There, Rain explains that Luther most likely wants to continue his investigation into Callum's death. Meanwhile, Luther is investigating the location given by his colleague from the signal frequency that previously sent the torture footage over the radio. At the prison, Martin searches Luther's room and finds a recording of the torture Luther previously heard from the letter he got. Martin, aware of Luther's next action, immediately ordered the police to follow the signal frequency. Sure enough, Luther, who was already on the scene, was met by a man who ran away after realizing that Luther was looking for him.
Wait, no!
After a short chase, Luther finally managed to corner the man. On that occasion, Luther asked the man to explain why he was broadcasting the recorded voices of the victims.
Don't move. Stop moving. Stop!
As it turned out, the man was just a victim of David, who was forced to comply with his request to broadcast the footage. David threatened to publish an indecent video of himself with a woman.
Blackmail. Catfisher had it all on film, all the things.
Since the man was unaware of the perpetrator's intentions, Luther asked him to give him the mobile phone that the perpetrator had been calling him with. Luckily, before the police broke into the location, Luther managed to escape. The next day, David contacted his partner to ask about their progress. As it turned out, David and his partner had been holding many girls and young men hostage for their execution. As Luther suspected, the two of them always broadcast the execution of the victims on the dark web through the site they created. That way, they made a lot of money. Now, their next show would be broadcast in a moment. In addition, it appeared that some computer experts hired by David had sabotaged several important people in his region. This was done so that they would give money to David through the dark web while watching his torture. Sometime later, Luther is seen in the center of town. He called Martin, and during the call, Luther asked Martin to trace the perpetrator's number, who had previously called his mobile phone. After the call, Martin asks Rain to trace the number given by Luther. That way, in addition to catching the perpetrator, they could also catch Luther, who was still designated as a fugitive. Not long after, Luther contacted Martin again and asked for the perpetrator's location, which turned out to be close to Luther's current whereabouts. Before Luther knew it, the police had been mobilized to the location. On the other hand, several people were seen on top of the building and preparing to end their lives while being recorded and broadcast on the internet. It was all a plan by David, who wanted to broadcast it on the dark web. After a long search, Luther finally managed to locate David through a call he made.
Who is this?
Man!
However, the situation gets even more chaotic as David manages to take a man hostage.
He's just about to get started.
It wasn't long before the police surrounded them, and when the bell rang, some of the men jumped to their deaths. David seized the opportunity to escape from Luther and the police. Luther, who did not want to lose track of David, continued to chase him until they finally got into a fight in the railway hallway. Their fight was finally stopped by a policeman who managed to find them. Unfortunately, the policeman was wounded by David, and David quickly fled the scene. Worried about the policeman's condition, Luther tried to help him. However, as the police began to arrive, Luther was forced to leave the policeman and return to chase David.
Jamal, calm down, mate. It's all right. Oh, officer injured! Jamal.
Shortly after, David contacts Rain's colleague Archie, who was previously assigned to uncover information about Luther's depravity. Archie was forced to comply with David's request because David threatened to leak Archie's private video. After that, David calls his colleague Arcady to ask about their progress. This time, David will be a little late because he has to pick up someone. At the same time, Luther enters an abandoned house to treat his wound. Later, he calls Martin and Rain to ask how the injured policeman is doing. After learning that the policeman was dead, Luther explained that the perpetrator's motive was money. He first blackmailed the victims in order to control them.
So I think he's probably lurking, fishing for secrets.
He's
feeding off it.
A moment later, Rain, who was worried about her daughter Anya, called her. During the conversation, Rain apologized for not being able to take Anya to school and told her to order a taxi instead. After the call ended, Anya, who felt thirsty, went to the kitchen to get water from the tap. But then, she heard someone calling her.
Manda, is that you?
The next day, Luther visited Corinne, who was at home, and wanted to talk to her. That's where Luther asked if there was anything Callum was hiding before his death, because Luther believed Callum was threatened to meet the perpetrator before his death. He also believes that the perpetrator will reappear in Corinne's life after Callum's death. Hearing Luther's explanation, Corinne realizes that it is David and says that David would not be so cruel. Even so, Luther still asks Corinne to explain who David really is.
Commiserated with me.
On the other hand, Martin managed to prove that Luther's suspicions during the investigation were correct. Not long after, Rain, who was investigating who David really was, suddenly got a call from David, who had taken Anya hostage. In the call, David asks Rain to kill Luther. If Rain refuses, David threatens to kill Anya.
Would you like your daughter back? And I'd like you to deal with this Luther issue for me, please.
Because Rain didn't want anything to happen to her child, she contacted Luther and asked him to meet.
This is an offer, one-time offer, and it ends in 5 seconds.
At a bar, Rain explained about David. There, Rain said that the burns on David's wife's body were David's own doing because David didn't accept when his wife wanted to divorce him. Seeing that the situation was not possible, Rain invited Luther to leave immediately. But who would have thought that, because her daughter was threatened, Rain now intended to bring Luther before David. Luckily, after hearing Luther say that David always breaks his promises and advises Rain not to trust him, Rain finally decides to work with Luther to catch David. Before that, they both went to David's wife, Georgette, and intended to ask for more information about David.
There's no reason on this earth that you should be afraid. Not anymore.
Georgia, he's got my daughter.
At the same time, Archie and his friend managed to get into David's website, which turned out to be about to show footage of torture. On the site, donors have the right to choose the victims and the way the victims will be executed. Before going to David's location, Luther contacts Martin and asks him for help.
Boss, I'm sorry, okay? I know that I've let you down.
But I am going to ask you for just one more favor.
Of course you are.
While on the other hand, Archie gets information that Rain is now going to go to David. He immediately contacted David while getting ready to leave. David, who knows that it was his wife who leaked his current whereabouts, then asks Archie to kill her immediately. If Archie succeeds, David promises not to bother him anymore. Reluctantly, Archie quietly leaves and intends to kill Georgette. But fortunately, as Luther suspected, Martin and the police caught Archie in the act. That's where a desperate Archie finally decides to end his own life. Back to Luther and Rain. After a very long journey, they finally arrive at the location given by Georgette. That's where Luther and Rain found several human bodies that David had deliberately put in a pool of ice.
We can't stop.
When they arrived at a large house, they found Anya, who had died by hanging, just like David's previous victims. Rain, who is deeply saddened by her daughter's death, blames Luther and tells him to get out of her way.
Get out! Get out! Get out!
Taking the initiative, Luther then goes through the place room by room. Not long after that, Rain realized that what was hung was not on his body.
It's not her. John!
Meanwhile, Luther, who was alone, met David, who immediately beat him up. Sometime later, Luther woke up bound with dozens of cameras in front of him.
No, of course.
It's revealed that David is broadcasting live on his website. Here, Rain is forced to torture Luther. If not, they will kill Anya.
I would like you to stab him. Would you do that for me?
Forced, Rain complied with David's request to stab Luther.
Mom, no! Mom!
Don't worry about it.
I'm so sorry.
Don't be sorry. Tell me.
After that, surprisingly, instead of freeing Anya, David asked Luther to hit Rain with a hammer.
Your turn, mate. Left kneecap with that.
Luther, who couldn't bear it, was forced to abandon his plan. Because they continued to threaten Anya, an emotional Luther immediately attacked David and his men. As Luther chased David, Rain rushed to save Anya. Since the room was locked and petrol was pouring everywhere, Rain and Anya had to fight against Arcavy to get out. Based on Luther's earlier report, Martin and the police now traveled to their location. Luckily, before David escaped in his car, Luther managed to catch up with him. Although David's car went into the water, Luther first stopped the spread of petrol using David's remote control device. Not long after, Luther, who was on the verge of death, was rescued by the rescue team. In the end, after all his struggles and sacrifices, Luther managed to break the chain of murder at its roots. Even so, he had to be put back in prison. Sometime later, Luther, who had regained consciousness, looked shocked because he was now in a government hideout. Shortly after that, Luther was approached by a group of people who turned out to be the head of intelligence. They wanted to talk to him one-on-one.
Chief would like a word.